Welcome, everybody. We are super excited to have you joining us today for what I know will be a very rich conversation. So, my name is Shane Yount, and I get the honor to lead Competitive Solutions. And today is our sixth podcast of the Pulse of High Performance. And you know what? What better topic as we dig into high performance than to have a person who spent much of their professional career in NASCAR? And so this morning, I want to just welcome Mike Mooney to the podcast today. We'll hear more from Mike in just a second, but let me just introduce very quickly our other hosts that are with us today. I'm joined by my business partner, Seth Davies, from our office in Atlanta. I'm joined by our Vice President of Consulting Services, Scott Fabro, from our office in Raleigh. And I'm joining you today from down at the coast of North Carolina. So we are delighted to be with you all today. And thank you for spending some valuable time with us. We know you're super busy, and we hope the next few minutes will add some rich content and maybe some thought-provoking mindset shifts today to your day. So welcome, everyone. And let's just kind of dive right in. Mike, it is great to see you today. Thank you for agreeing to spend some time with us on the sixth episode of the Pulse of High Performance. And before we kind of dive in, because we've got a long list of questions, I want to just have you maybe take a moment and tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of your history, your time in NASCAR, and then more importantly, how you got into the space that you're in today, because we've been very fortunate to be able to engage you with many of our large scale projects in the last couple of years. And tell our audience about kind of your history and what you're doing now.
That's great. And first of all, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to join you all for this conversation. I mean, anything with high performance in the title, I'm all about and wanted to be part of. So thank you for that. And in terms of my career, I was fortunate to have spent the last 25 plus years in motorsports, NASCAR in particular, also IndyCar, F1, NHRA drag racing as well. And during that time, I really had the opportunity to work in the various facets of those sports, from the agency side to the brand and sponsor side, as well as the team property side. And during those years, my career really kind of ran a wide spectrum, starting with communications and PR, working into crisis management, where I did a lot of reputation rehab and repair, kind of fixing things when people would say some knucklehead things on TV, or if there were, sponsor issues that would come up that tend to happen from time to time. I also had the opportunity then to be working with brands who were saying, hey, we want to invest in motorsports. We've got 15, 20, 75, $100 million. What do we do with it? And I was able to work with teams where we would literally build out the framework and the structure of what those sponsorships would look like, connecting those dots to ensure that their brands were integrated in a credible, authentic, and relevant way within the sport to drive revenue back for their business. And honestly, during that time, I had the opportunity to be working around, high performing teams, whether they be drivers, there were crew chiefs, there were leaders in there. And it really, got me thinking about, how do we take the lessons that we've learned here and the work that we do day in, day out, week in, week out to be competitive and stay competitive, even when the odds seem absolutely stacked against us. And I was, really collecting notes, and I've written the book on reputation, which became kind of my launch pad out in 2018. And I really wanted to start a new chapter in my life and using what I had learned in this high performance world and take it out to leaders and organizations and teams to help them get to another level of performance themselves.
You know what? That is awesome. And, full disclosure, we've been able to engage you, Mike, in your new capacity to support a lot of our client engagements. And one of the things that I love when you talk about, be it at the Army or be it at our user conference, you really make this connection in that people are high performance vehicles also. Could you say just a couple of words on that so people understand the connection you're making there?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So again, going back to my career in motorsports, working around these high performing and championship level teams where they were constantly building, fixing, restoring, innovating their race cars, these high performance vehicles to be competitive, to be in a place where they could stay in the race, right? It occurred to me that there was a different type of high performance vehicle in this world that needs the same building, fixing, restoring, and innovation. And that's people. That's you and me. And the idea, though, is that, in society, in the typical drive is that, well, to be the high performance vehicle, I need to be working 80 hours a week, and I need to, sacrifice my integrity, sell my soul, ditch relationships, forget about my health. And truly, while we are all vehicles for leadership and innovation and solutions, but we're also vehicles for hope and grace, and love, quite honestly. So what I do in my messaging is really try to shift people's thinking away from being high performer isn't about overdrive. It's really about three key things. And it's about being more present. It's about being more intentional and having a sense of curiosity.
I love that. When you think about those things, particularly the last one on curiosity, I just read an article on this of what distinguishes and differentiates, really good leaders from great leaders. And time again, it comes back to this idea of curiosity. And I think that's something that often has not been part of the mindset as we've thought about leadership development over the last couple of decades, is really leaning into this idea of curiosity. Could you say just another kind of comment or two about how you view curiosity from a leadership development standpoint? And then I think Scott's got a question for you.
Absolutely. And I believe what you just said is so key in this, Shane, is that traditionally, leadership development is ground yourself in a strong sense of knowledge and self and bring that confidence forward. And that's what people want to see as you're leading from the front. The challenge with that, though, is we often get this three-letter word that gets in our way. That's ego, right? Ego starts to really become something that doesn't allow us to step into curiosity. And quite honestly, ego keeps us in a rigid state of mind and being. So curiosity actually is the idea of inviting more in, right? Which is what teams are looking for now. They don't want to be told what to do. They want to be brought into a conversation and have an opportunity to create a solution. So that's what curiosity does. And I agree with you. I think it needs to be a fundamental part of learning and a skill that leaders should be embracing today.
Awesome.
Yeah. Scott, what do you have?
All right. Thanks, Mike. It's great to just listen to that analogy of, just the analogy with a high performing vehicle and how leaders can, just the mindsets around that. And I just want to build on, what you were just talking about with just demonstrating curiosity. I think it's pivotal for leaders to engage their teams in that mindset. And one of the things that I know you talk about when listening to your keynote and just knowing what you're passionate about is just around the topic of the power of teams and innovation, right? And in particular, the 1%. You always talk about, hey, listen, we don't need this monumental improvements. It's really about how can we get better and gain traction and momentum on finding those 1% that you can just build on, right? Quick wins and engage teams to really harness that as a competitive advantage to really take your performance to another level. And I love that because often you hear things like, people they equate value with the complexity and value with the level of or magnitude of what those improvements are. So, and I always say, and it's a great quote out there, that delayed perfection is the enemy of continuous improvement, right? It's waiting for things just to happen. So can you speak to just your mindset around kind of that value? And you talk about the 1% improvements and just what you really mean by that, and maybe some examples of what you've seen in your career and in coaching and leading and training others on just how do you get in that mindset around those 1% kind of daily improvements?
Yeah, absolutely, Scott. And it's so important. I love the point you made about the perfection and progress and delaying that, because oftentimes we get in our own heads. I mean, what's the saying in baseball? Everyone loves the long ball, however, it's really the singles and doubles that get the runners on base that will score more runs. So the idea here in racing and what we leaned into was this difference between 100% daily effort, meaning like, well, gosh, I'm working hard, I'm doing the best I can, to 1% of daily improvement. Like what's the 1% of improvement versus the effort? And, a great example of that, and I use this often, is the story of Ray Evernham and Jeff Gordon. So back in the 90s, Ray Evernham was the crew chief for Jeff Gordon. Prolific team in the 90s, absolutely dominated that decade in NASCAR on many levels, not just what they were doing on the racetrack, but it was really what was happening behind the scenes. It was a space where Ray was not just looking at the race car as the car, because oftentimes in business, we often look at our product as the sum of its parts, and basically say, well, this is what we have to offer. When the reality is that it's actually, just many parts put together in one. And that's what Ray did with the race car. He actually looked at that car as a way to innovate and found hundreds of ways to do so, but it wasn't him alone. So what he did is he went and challenged the different people in his departments and said, look, I'm looking for the 1%. I'm not looking for the big swing. I'm not looking for the big idea. I want the small 1%. And what he did is he actually then let them go find it, right? Sometimes leaders feel this pressure, especially today. It's like, well, if they're not going to find the solution on the team, I've got to find it. So he was very smart in delegating that out to the team. And a couple of examples of what came back in. One of them, and we were joking earlier before, yes, I have props right here, but who am I without my props? So basically the one story in this is the hood pin, right? A hood pin is a very simple piece of equipment on the race car, yet very important. It keeps the hood connected to the chassis and the frame. So as the drivers are going 200 miles an hour down the track, the hoods don't come up in the driver's face. That's problematic. So traditionally, the hood pins were mounted this way across. There are 4 of them that go across the hood. And one of his engineers said, well, hey, Ray, what if we just turn those hood pins that way, right? What would that do? Well, it makes the car just a little more aerodynamic, right? Just a little tiny change, right? 1%. Then some of his mechanics were coming back, and this is back when there were more nuts and bolts on the cars in the day, but they were like, hey, we've got like so many of these nuts and bolts, extra thread. What if we just cut off this extra thread on these nuts and bolts to save weight, to gain weight, to give back to the aero team that they can use on the car? They went, and these were just 2 ideas of dozens and dozens that the team came back with. The funny thing is about it is that, and I'll ask you guys this: if you were the engineer that was sitting there going, the hood pin, well, it's always been this way, but what if we did this? Would you be almost embarrassed to bring that up in front of other people?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of times what gets in the way. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like, this is really so inconsequential, shaving threads off of bolts. But what Ray did is he recognized the power of the cumulative effect of 1% across multiple departments. And where I bring this home in the messaging is that if you take a snapshot of their time over like a 3-year period, there's like over 180 races, or maybe even a 5-year period, like 180 races. Forget about the championships they won. Forget about the wins. It was all about their top 10s and top 5s. Out of those 180 plus races, they were in the top 10 over 120 times. So it just speaks to the power of consistency that this brings forth on the team, that puts you in position that when you can win, you can take advantage of that opportunity, right? That's the power of finding 1%. So what Ray did in that was, look, he acknowledged the need for it. He turned his people loose and said, get after it. He celebrated the small ones that he knew would gain to the larger wins. So, truly, it's a great model for us to look at the 1%. Like, where's your hood pin? What's that going to be?
Yeah, and I know Seth has a couple of questions too, but just to wrap that up, because again, I think you just hit on the different, kind of the 4 different things that were in my mind as you spoke to that is, number one, the leader's got to open that door, right? Set the expectations that almost like dare to try, be curious, be inquisitive, go out and look for, mine these, especially things that are not only continuous improvement, but at best also things that are getting in your way, things that are pain points, frustrations, and then. Letting them go find it, allocating time, empowering them to truly own it, not just saying one thing, right, but owning it, and then really to celebrate and share. And I know that when you speak to the clients that we're involved with you, that always resonates because people leave the session and really start talking about, hey, what is our hood pin, right? Because when I can see something that's been done, and that's why the power of sharing, even within your organization, I can connect to, well, what have you done? And what are some of the things then that I can do perhaps to get in that same space?
That's
Super
right.
important. And I appreciate you sharing your insights on that.
No, of course, man. And it really gets back to the fact that oftentimes we are, well, not often, we are creatures of habit. And often when we get into our work, it becomes the hamster wheel of, hey, we just got to get it done. This is really that space of being intentional, as I mentioned earlier, intentional for the leader to say, hey, I want to make sure that we're taking a step back to actually unpack the work we're doing. Where could we find that 1%? And give people that space. I know one of your clients, 3M, I mean, that's part of their mantra internally, where they give their people time for innovation. It's just what they do. It means that much to them.
Yeah, just a thought real quick before Seth takes it. I know once people find that 1%, Mike, though, I think it's imperative that leaders affirm and recognize that, right?
Yes.
And I think, what we see often with our clients is we are making significant improvements. We are improving the business. We are moving it forward. We are finding not just 1% sometimes, but significantly more percents. But we've got to make sure we're intentional to take that time to stop and affirm that behavior. Because as we're encouraging that type of creativity and innovation and curiosity, when we see it, we've got to acknowledge it, right? And I'm sure you guys did that in Ray Ebernham's team.
Well, absolutely. So here's the other little nugget I'll throw in there, Shane, because it's so important, and you just kind of triggered this in my own mind, is that the leader has to acknowledge it, and the way they do it is so crucial. Okay, it can't be something, and maybe y'all can relate to this, when you bring the idea in and the leader goes, yes, but. Mm-hmm. And as soon as you hear that word but, it's so deflating, isn't it? It's not because I've also heard that but is no in a tuxedo, right? It's just dressed up, right? So I think that the note to the leader is using a word that's either you take from improv, which is yes and, or yes yet. And that's powerful. It could be yes, and we should also be looking out for XYZ, or yes, yet I think we should also take into account these other parameters that would have been after the but, the yes, but you haven't thought about these things. It's the yes, and we should also look at how these can fit into that solution. So that, again, you're keeping it collaborative, but being really intentional with your words as a leader.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, I've been so excited to have you on here. As you know, I'm a big NASCAR fan, and I love to hear your NASCAR stories about that. But one of the things I want you to come comment on is teamwork, collaboration, and engagement. And that's, I think, one thing that many organizations are challenged with is, how do we break down the silos in our organizations? How do we create that collaboration and innovation? And I've heard you talk several times, and you talked about there's a particular team that you work with where everybody was siloed in the organization and the team wasn't being successful, but the leader recognized that and said, hey, we need to come together and work together side by side, regardless of what department, what role, what function with that. Talk about, your experience on leadership and how important it is to engage everyone across the organization to drive better results and that continuous improvement.
Yeah, without a doubt, that is vital. But the cross department conversations are key for success. And unfortunately, what we see oftentimes in business, as well as race teams, race teams aren't really that much different than businesses on the day-to-day. I mean, we still struggle with having different departments. And guess what? Different departments have different goals and then different personalities. And there's the historical relationship between the departments. Oh, you're not going to like these people. Let me tell you why, and right. I mean, it's like you hear the joke, and I mean, no offense to the people in legal. Oh yeah. Legal is where good ideas go to die. Right. I mean, that type of, and I will stress again, no disrespect to legal. They're very important. But I just, I say that to emphasize the point that in some companies, there is sort of this culture and historical bias that happens between departments. And we see it in racing as well. And what the story I was sharing was at Roush Fenway Racing. Well, now Roush Fenway Keselowski Racing, excuse me. But we found ourselves at a time with our competition team back in the 2014, 15, 16. It was a very difficult time for us, and we found that we were honestly operating in these departmental silos, and what we decided to do, because it became these like little fiefdoms. Like everybody was like, well, hey, I did my part. It's not my fault. This other group didn't do their part. They couldn't do their part. It was just about, it was just about me, not about we. And one of the most vital roles on the race team is this person called the spotter. And the spotter is the one who stands high atop the racetrack property, and they've got binoculars and radio communication directly to the driver. Crew chief can hear them. They're on the team frequency. But it's truly the spotter's job is to like be in communication with that driver as they're focused on their goal of either gaining position or protecting position inches away from their competitors at over 200 miles an hour. It's the spotter's role to tell them what's happening in their blind spots, right? That could be in their sides. It could be ahead or behind, or just what's happening in the places they can't see, so that they don't get into those spots, because it could take them and others out of the race. So this idea of having someone to spot for us was something that was interesting, because the way that we started to build our cars, we changed it and actually had departments crossing each other, like walking past each other, connecting. We intentionally created these touch points that allowed people to talk and build relationship and ask questions and actually say, hey, I changed this, on the wire harness over here, and maybe speaking to the fabricator saying, this is why I did that. And then the fabricator at least knows, okay, there's a rationale behind this. Instead of what would typically happen in the past is the fabricator would come in and say, what dumbass did this? This is ridiculous, and they would just go in and try to fix something and undo it, right? So really this idea of spotting for each other became vital. And again, open lines of communication, built trust, allowed innovation to actually bloom and marinate a bit as well. But it was important that we had people looking out for each other. So my message on that to organizations, especially between departments, is saying, hey, where are the blind spots that you're seeing? Do you have a department that's consistently running into a wall, or do you have departments that are doing this? Let's get spotters going here so we can see it from a different perspective. That's the power.
Yeah, I love that, Mike. And I would even take that one step further, is that when we think about the spotters building that product or building that car, I think there's even a greater utilization for spotters, and that is leader to leader, right? Because so often, you talk about blind spots, and we think about blind spots in production or manufacturing or supply chain or HR, but we all have those blind spots as leaders as well. And to tie back to something you mentioned earlier, when we're managing by that ego, that doesn't necessarily create a culture where people want to say, hey, you might think about this differently, or pointing out maybe a blind spot that you didn't even know existed. Talk to me a little bit about like how you see spotters on that leader to leader relationship, and then maybe share who do you use as a spotter in your life? Yeah,
it's great because the leader is so important, yet the underpinning of that is this word called intention. And it's not being intentional, it's understanding the person's intention. There has to be a level of trust in this relationship. Unfortunately, it happens too often in business because there is let's be honest, right? There's not just competition out in the marketplace. There's competition within the organization oftentimes too. And as you get higher up, oftentimes it can get more and more challenging and more competitive. So there's got to be a high level of trust to begin with for the leaders to actually lean into each other. The other part of it is knowing the intention. I've shared this with you all before, and I think it's just so powerful. There was a researcher over in Britain who did a years-long study on the power of people understanding a leader's intention. If you think about it, right? When you're getting a review, or if a manager or leader is giving you feedback on something, there's a part of us is listening to what's being said to us, but there's another part of us that's creating some distraction, which is saying in our heads, what are they really trying to get at? Mm-hmm. Is there something else they're trying to say? What's their intention, right? I mean, what's the game? What's the angle here? And that undermines this ability to have true trust by understanding the intention. So what this researcher found out is that with two simple statements, and they've got to be true though, with two statements, a leader can truly build a stronger bond. And leader to leader or leader to the team, simply by saying to that person on the team or that leader and say, listen, I am here for your greatest good. I'm here for your greatest good. I want nothing more for you than to succeed, because if you succeed and do well, guess what? We all do. Second, I mean you no harm. I don't mean you any psychological or emotional, and again, we'll call HR in physical harm and anything that I'm sharing with you. So what I'm saying to you is for your greatest good and the greatest good of the organization. If a leader can get that dialed in and actually live that out, there's the key. You got to live it out and be consistent. You can't just parrot it. Right. Then you can have that the leader spotter where there's going to be genuine, like, thank you. Like, you can tell somebody what they need to hear and they know why versus what they want to hear just to placate them.
Yeah. Gosh, I love that. That's so true. So the 2 points again. So I mean you no harm, and I'm here for your best intentions.
I'm here for your greatest good.
Your greatest good. I love that.
And I mean you no harm. Yeah. But you got to believe it, Mike, and then you got to live it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Mike, one thing too, I think that the audience could benefit from is maybe just, I love how when you talk about trust, you use a simple acronym, don't roll the dice, right? You use the dice acronym. So you have the, kind of the 4 cornerstones of how you can effectively build trust. So maybe speak a little bit about that, because, I think if we can make it, really so simple that people can resonate, what does that intent look like? What are the different cornerstones of building trust that, man, I can use a spotter. I can develop on my own, but also use a spotter to have those kind of conversations. So you can just speak briefly on your view of how you can build trust through your DICE model.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, absolutely. The DICE acronym, quite honestly, was a way for me just to kind of, for myself to remember that each day. Because I want to make sure that when I'm showing up that I've kind of am living out the things that I'm speaking on as well. So DICE stands for dependability. Right, that you're going to show up and do what you say you're going to do. It's integrity, which is doing the right thing, even when no one's looking, because ultimately in today's world, there's someone looking some way, shape, or form. And I'm not just saying like camera's big brother, but people are looking. Right, there's consistency, and that being consistent in what it is that you're doing, saying, how you're showing up, and then there's the last one. E is engagement, which is basically, if you see something, then do something. It's, and that's not just the TSA, model, but it's really about, look, for leaders, where there's smoke, there's probably going to be fire. So how about we jump in and manage the smoke instead of wait for the fire to erupt? And then now we're firefighters, right? So if we can live into or bring those elements to life each day, then yes, you're building trust.
Love that.
Yeah. Hey, Mike, you mentioned in your opening introduction your book Reputation Shift, which I highly recommend to all our listeners. That's a phenomenal book. But why did you write that book? I mean, what was the genesis of the content and the topic on that book from your perspective? Yeah,
so it plays product placement, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Having worked on, dozens and dozens of crisis situations in motorsports over the years. I mean, ranging again from driver deaths and fan injuries all the way to, again, drivers saying knucklehead things on national TV and, bankruptcies and things of that nature. I realized that the idea of reputation management was so reactive. And this question kept popping up in my mind. It's like, well, how much is your reputation worth? Because most of the time people weren't thinking about that until the damage was done. Like, we don't recognize its value until we've paid a price. So I wrote this book from a place of being more proactive and saying, let's not wait just to manage this, but there's a way that we can actually develop it. I dare say even design it. However, it's got to be done from a values-based perspective. And that's the key. That's what I wanted to write in here, is that the book is really sharing use now tactics and strategy on how we can be building, strengthening, protecting our reputation, but from a values-based perspective, because that's true to us, right? It's not being something you aren't. It's not being that reputational chameleon, like, oh, I'm in this room, so I'm going to act this way. And with these people, I'm going to act that way. It's being consistent and authentic from your values. So that was really the idea. And it's funny, as I was writing it, my editor said to me, she's like, Mike, I don't understand. Are you writing this for a company or you're writing this for the individual? Because you're kind of you're toggling back and forth in your pronouns and things. And that's when it also hit me, Seth. I'm like, you know what? I'm writing this for people. I'm writing this for you and I, because the truth be told, the organization doesn't build its reputation. The reputation of the organization is built upon the shoulders of every single person that wears that brand and has interactions with their key stakeholders, their customers, suppliers, whomever it might be. We're all responsible for building reputation every single day.
Are there any reputation tips that you can share with leaders?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say in terms of strategies, okay, a good strategy, we talked about one already, is having a spotter. Yep. I think that's something that can be applied not only to the organization and creating for innovation, as Shane, we were talking earlier, but it also helps when you have a spotter that can speak into you. And making sure that they're the people that we do trust, because they're the ones whom I'm going to take you aside and say, hey, I've noticed this, and this going on. Are you okay? Hey, I noticed you're jumping back into these blind spots again. I just want to make you aware, like when you said these things, here's what happened after you left the meeting, right? It's things like that leaders can have spotters. I think that's super important. The other tip that I often share, and it's in the book as well, is this idea of visualizing your instant replay. So Seth, and I know you're a big sports guy. What does the instant replay do when you see that during a game or something?
It plays the tape backwards, right? It shows you what happened, right? So you can look at the movements and the behaviors and the outcome of it.
And what's really cool about that is that it does it very slowly. But then what else do they have involved there? Yes, multiple camera angles. You get to see it from different perspectives, which I could be adamant that it was safe, but then when I look at it from a different perspective, I'm like, ooh, no, that wasn't even close, right? Yeah. So what I encourage leaders, I encourage everyone as you're thinking about this, as you're going to make a decision, and whether that's like sending an email or making that phone call or having that conversation or whatever that might be, I would encourage you to visualize the instant replay. Like, think about what's this going to look like from this person's perspective, that perspective, a stakeholder's perspective. Like, this really gets you in that space of curiosity instead of in that space of like, no, this is just how I'm going to do it because I've got to get it done now. And oftentimes we'll look at it and see, well, oh gosh, I've got to change my tone. I've got to change the language. Oh, they could look at it or take it this way. So I need to really think about how I want to send this message. So that's all the power of visualizing that instant replay, because it really can save you a ton of backpedaling or reputation repair or rebuilding your trust or all those different things. It's simple, but it takes us being present, intentional, and curious, right, to be able to bring that to life.
Mm-hmm. Great topic. I mean, sometimes the simple things are the ones we don't see in front of us, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, Mike, where have you been speaking lately? I know you're in high demand to bring this message to different industries. Tell us a couple of places you've been lately and kind of the topics you lean into.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been to a handful of events the last month and a half, and I've got some good ones coming up, pretty much all around the country, which has been great. And honestly, the messages I'm asked to deliver are still in this space. Really, it's about helping leaders unlock more potential and opportunity by bringing forth ideas around better presence, better intentionality, better curiosity. That's going to, again, bring teams together in a more authentic way. I'm also working with groups doing reputation workshops as well, and helping them as organizations looking at the reputation. What can we do to really, more importantly, like see where are the risks? That's so important, is to recognize where are the risks to reputation for our company, and more importantly, where are they within the industry, so that we can look at that and start creating a competitive differentiation by recognizing where our industry is getting dinged, but you know what? We're actually doing something about it. Now we can start promoting these things proactively about the brand and the organization, right? So it's just things like that. And then I'm working with leaders and other groups on building their brands, right? Helping them build authentic brands that can help them in their careers and their lives reach, new levels of opportunity and success.
I think that's really interesting, because we keep talking about what we want to build in the future or become in the future.
Yeah.
And that assumes then that people are willing to change. That assumes that there is an awareness, a self-awareness, an organizational awareness that what got us here is not going to get us there. And there's a quote that you use that I think is very resonant to get people to understand change management. And if you don't mind, say a couple of words about how you view letting go of the old and embracing the new.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Shane. I appreciate that, because it's something that I really believe in. You know, there's that old joke about, you know, how many people here, raise your hand if you want change, and I think all the hands go up, and then it's okay, great. Raise your hand if you want to change, and it's just it's like people like the idea of it, yet don't necessarily want to have to change perhaps the way that they're operating. And I actually like using the word evolve versus change. Change to me feels more like, all right, I'm doing something wrong, so now I have to change that behavior. I prefer to look at it through the lens of evolution, right? Like, okay, I'm in a role and the business is evolving, which therefore I need to evolve as well. And that says that I still have value here and I can still play an important role, whether I'm doing the same thing or they're telling me that I need to work in a different department or you know, cross skill, upskill, whatever that might be. So the quote that you were speaking about, I think is just really powerful for leaders, that they have to, if they're in a state, evolve their team, right? That they paint a picture and have a vision that people can see and feel emotionally and understand what it is. So they need to really be able to understand the value of the new so that they can abandon the old.
I love
that. People have to understand that the promise of the new is worth the abandonment of the old. And if you want to take it to even more of a visual, think about being in the open water, right? And people are like clinging onto a life raft, and you tell them, come over here. It's better over here. It's better, but you're going to have to swim a little bit. You're going to have to reach. You're going to have to get uncomfortable. And there's a point where they've got one hand still on the boat, and the other one's got to be reaching out. And there's a point where they got to let go. So it's in this space that the leader has to really let them know that the promise of this new is worth the abandonment of the old, and it's going to be better for all of us. That's the key, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's very resonant. That metaphor makes it certainly drives.
Because too many times it's like we got to change. Why are we changing? We end up in change fatigue, especially in a market where we're literally looking at results in real time. It's not even, I was talking to a CMO about 4 months ago, and we were talking about this project, and I said, well, what's that looking like in 6 months? He goes, 6 months? He's like, Mike, you're working off a calendar, man. I'm looking at 6 minutes on my clock. That's how I'm measuring time right now. So, that, Siri didn't quite like what I was saying here. We have a fifth guest here on the Pulse of High Performance. It's Siri. So the point there is that teams can get into what I call change fatigue, where they just, it's the change and the flavor of the month, and they're going to go through the motions, but they're only going to do so much because they know that in another 3 weeks to a month, it's going to change. It'll be something else. And, that, as you all know, because that's a lot of what your work is getting people to really understand the value of change and how do you go about doing it in a process-based way that becomes sustainable and people can see the value in it and they've got their dashboards. That's powerful. Like what you all are bringing to the market from that standpoint is absolutely gold, because too often times it's just change, go figure it out. And people aren't going to stick around for that.
No.
Good point. And that gets back to mindset too, right? And making sure, Seth, you were mentioning that about mindset, of how we show up, for change, and how that can work. So,
I know we got just a few minutes left. Seth, Scott, anything else for Mike?
Well, I've got.
I just want to go ahead, Seth.
Well, you go, Scott, because we got a question. We'll let Mike wrap up with a question on that. So
no, I just wanted to wrap up the reputation. I love the question from Seth regarding what prompted you to write the book, and I just remember going through that and following some of the stuff that you're talking about now, when you kind of relate the brand to that as well, and defining that as the promise of an experience, right? I think that's powerful, and it resonated with me because, to me, that's the proactive part. As leaders, I think we owe it to ourselves to really think about, because we're in the grind, we're just getting stuff done, and there's a lot of fatigue, and there's a lot of we talk about cultures of dependency, right? And I just think that the way you frame up, and I look at reputation, presence, brand is kind of all interrelated. It's how do you show up, right? What kind of a climate do you want to foster to create the kind of culture that you arrive at? And I just like the way you frame that up, right? The promise of an experience. And I think everybody out there, if you're a leader, right, should be thinking about what is that experience? And because that, I think, is a proactive part of exposing a little bit of vulnerability to say, if I'm not there yet, what behaviors do I need to change? What systems do I need to implement? What engagements do I need to, to further enhance and relationships to build? So I really think that brings everything home that we've talked about that we should be thinking about as leaders.
I appreciate that, because it's true. I mean, I really, that definition is something that I've used for years, especially when people, they would kind of like scoff a few years back saying, well, I'm not a brand. It's like, well, no, I understand that, but if you were to like change the definition of that, change the way it looks, could you then look at it through that lens of really the brand is, what's the promise of the experience that people are going to have? And what that does, and getting back to presence and intentionality, is it sets a marker out there for the leader to say, this is the experience I want people to have with me when they're with me. Oh, and by the way, that experience needs to be rooted in their values, right? So it's really going back to saying, what values am I bringing to life today? Because if I do that consistently, I will create the experience for people that I would like them to have with me. And it's not rocket science. I'm not having to work so hard. In the beginning, you do, because you really want to be intentional, but over time, it just becomes second nature.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the beauty of this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Mike,
Thanks,
before
Mike.
I share this question with you, I just want to thank you for your time today. And I
you.
really enjoy our partnership, because I think the messaging that we bring around process-based leadership and creating the non-negotiable processes, you complement it very nicely with about the change and having, from a leadership perspective, who's your spotter, what are your blind spots, and embracing, a new way of work. And so I'm really glad that we had the opportunity to do that. But we got a question from Parker in Raleigh. Parker wants to know, how can I contact Mike about having him come talk to our leaders at our organization?
Oh, that's great. Parker and Raleigh, thank you so much. I wanted to the first-time caller, long-time listener. So thank you, Parker. No, very simply, you can email me at mike@mikemooney.com. You email me there. That's the easiest way. Yep.
Great.
That'd be great.
That's awesome.
Any closing comments, Mike, before Shane wraps us up?
Gosh, the only thing that I would say, and again, I want to thank you for the time, and I want to thank you for the work that you're doing and the messages that you're sharing through this great show. And I know it's show number 6, I hopefully have like 600 plus, right? I would just want to close with the thought, again, going back to us all being high performance vehicles. I really believe that the world that we can live in ourselves is driven by how we see ourselves in our minds. So I would encourage people to really be thinking about their mindset. We're in a time right now in the world, there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of divisiveness, a lot of reasons for us to be maybe a little grumpy. But that doesn't mean that, or to feel grumpy, right? That's the key. It doesn't mean you have to be grumpy. So just recognize the difference. Like when you're feeling something, the difference between feeling it and being it, and you've got a choice in there. So take some time for that mindset. Really think about the way you're showing up for yourself, the words you're using to yourself and about yourself, because that's what's going to then frame up how you're going to approach the world and how people are going to experience you. So please take your time, be kind to yourself, be graceful, and just know that your best is yet to come.
You know what? I love that, Mike. And again, I'll echo our thanks to you. But you close your talks with a great story about Junior Johnson and the difference between involved and committed. And before I give just a couple of closing thoughts, can you share that story real quick? Because I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. So this goes back to 1998, right? Way back in the day. I was managing the public relations for NASCAR's 50th anniversary at the time. And I found myself, I was in the car driving Junior Johnson to an event. And Junior, he got his start in racing as a moonshiner up in the Appalachian Mountains. He was a in the Hall of Fame as a team owner, driver. I mean, everything this man has done, it's been incredibly successful. And I was driving with him, and I don't know what made me, actually say it, but I was really wanted to know, like, gosh, this guy's been so successful. And so I asked him, I said, Junior, you've been successful in all the things that you've done in your career. Is there something that you can share with me that I could learn from? Because I want to be successful in my career. And he said, actually, there is. And again, some folks may have heard this story before, but when you hear it from Junior Johnson, it truly is like, whoa, okay. And he said, Mike, success comes down to this breakfast plate. And I said, a breakfast plate? He goes, yeah, bacon and eggs. I said, bacon and eggs, that's where success comes from. Because Mike, it took 2 animals to make that breakfast plate, right? And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, the hens laid the eggs. Well, what are the hens going to do tomorrow? I said, lay more eggs. And the day after that, lay more eggs. Okay, well, those hens, Mike, were involved in making that breakfast plate. Then he took a deep breath and he looked at me and said, but that hog, that hog gave everything it had, whether it wanted to or not. It gave everything it had. So you see, that hog was committed. And that's the question I always ask myself and my team when we're coming into work on a challenge, a solution, we're trying to get better. Are we involved or are we committed? And I thought that was a great question. Awesome. Yeah,
I love that. And you know what? Just on that line, I just have to close with this personal message. So before the podcast started, I was wearing my Beach Mountain, North Carolina hat. And Mike, you mentioned certainly we know that they are struggling through Hurricane Helene, and just people that live in the mountains where I'm from, we don't worry about hurricanes, and now they're dealing with some pretty catastrophic situations up there. Mike, have a very personal story of your son who's up there on the front lines, involved and committed.
Yeah. I appreciate that, Shane, very much. Yeah, our son Blair.
Into helping those folks up there.
We're very proud of him. He's a senior up at App State. He's going to be wrapping up in December, but he's also in the North Carolina Army National Guard, and his unit was activated about a week and a half ago. And he's been up there in search and rescue, as well as helping to distribute supplies. Very proud of him. Last night we were talking with him, and he said, looks like we're going to wrap up this week, and get new people in. He said, but I really want to stay and help in that transition because I've been here from the beginning. And he's committed. I mean, and along with so many other people up there, whether they're serving in the armed forces and the Army National Guard, or they're just people coming up to help. I mean, everyone's up there committed to these communities, but having that personal connection where my wife and I, Krista, are very proud of that young man. Absolutely.
Absolutely, as you
Fantastic.
should be. Well, listen, I really appreciate you taking some time today to share with us what you're doing in industry, how you're creating high-performance humans across the world as they listen to your message. Seth, thanks again for being, and Scott for helping host our 6th edition of the Pulse of High Performance. We'll hope you join us next week. Seth, who do we have on slate for next week?
So next week, we got Will Bryce, Michael Watkins talking about the importance of data and how you manage your data and actually utilize your data for a strategic advantage. They've got a great podcast lined up, so make sure you join us next week.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Mike.